For more discussion about the so-called loneliness economy in Beijing, we have Ms. Han Hua, media and communication consultant, and Andy Mark, founder and president of the Red Pagoda Resources. Meanwhile, in Southampton, we have Mike Bastin, professor at the University of Southampton. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to ask the general question. When you feel lonely, do you want to spend money? If yes, raise your hand immediately. Oh, we got Professor Bastin, pretty reasoned and seasoned. He didn't raise his hand. The other three of us all did. Tell me why, Professor Bastin, you could remain so calm, unlike the three of us.
I don't often feel lonely. My lifestyle is very busy, probably too busy. I suppose when there are moments when I'm so sort of edging towards loneliness, I really just get on with something else to do and start sort of socializing. I don't naturally spend money. A lot of people do, though.
But you know, Ms. Han, socializing means you are interacting with others, but that process does not necessarily going to help you if you feel lonely. That is a very interesting subject, isn't it?
Of course. And in my opinion, these days, socializing also can mean spending money, and also means that you can kind of ease off your loneliness to some extent. In my opinion, I divide this kind of loneliness economy into three categories.
Okay, you've already done your research.
The loneliness economy is such a general term, but I would like to categorize this.
They are?
One is the homo economy, mainly refers to the Chinese men or the men who would like to spend their hard-getting money into some virtual flowers, or even, expensive gifts, the virtual gifts, to this online live broadcast. To those hosts. The independent economy mainly refers to Chinese women, thanks to the policy of women hold up the half of the sky. That Chinese women have independent economy when socialize with people and do online shopping very easily. And the third is categorized as homeland economy. This is part of loneliness economy, but it is not that lonely because people just sit at home, but spend money because of this advancement of online technology.
Okay, well, you have already categorized them into so many different ways.
My opinion.
Mr. Mark, well, loneliness economy is only a way that people put a name tag on some of the forms that people use in order to smooth up their day and make sure they will be less loneliness, but we don't know the result, of course. Mr. Mark, what do you make of that phrase and the fact that it becomes such a popular phrase you see so often these days?
Well, I think we should distinguish this a little bit more clearly, because I think when we're talking about the loneliness economy, we're referring perhaps to the singleton economy, meaning people that are single, because in fact, to sound a little bit depressing, but some of the loneliest people in the world are married people. Unhappily married people are actually much lonelier than single people.
All right, this is a very complicated conversation. I have realized that this is not just about the economy or loneliness economy. This is about social problems, psychological problems. This is about gender equity. This is about a lot of different things. Professor Bastin, I hope you are not more confused than I am.
I'm not more confused. I think obviously China's changing. We see younger generations with a lot of economic freedom and a lot of independence now. So we're going to see slightly more solitary lifestyles, and I think the important but subtle distinction between loneliness and being alone is very important. So being alone is not necessarily the same as being lonely.
There are various kinds of new possibilities coming up all the time, Mr. Mark. How is new technology helping us, if we could use the word help us, actually to be able to find ourselves better occupied with things rather than have to fall into the trap of loneliness and not try to find any solution to it?
Well, I think technology, especially digital technology, has been a game changer for this. So I think there's two kinds of lonely people, right? So first, people that are lonely that don't want to be lonely, and dating apps, dating services help solve that problem, as do things like social messaging, WeChat, WhatsApp, that let you talk to people anywhere in the world so you can feel less lonely even though you're not physically with that person. On the other hand, some people enjoy the solitude, being alone, and might call that lonely, but actually in some sense enjoy that. And then there's an entire universe of things that the digital world offers, whether that's playing games, whether that's watching videos, or even shopping online from home.
But on the other hand, some also suggest that technologies and the convenient use of technologies to get things done also make us, in a way, quote-unquote, lonely, because we do not have to necessarily, besides virtually, interacting with other people.
Well, I think this is certainly a first world problem, in that people that have the means, the economic means, as well as the time to indulge in playing with their smartphones or surfing on the net in other ways, that it does have an isolating, somewhat antisocial element to it if we look at it from conventional terms. But on the other hand, I think that we can see too that one can build these online communities, and perhaps it's easier to share intimate information with people virtually than in person. So I myself don't see it entirely as a negative.
Professor Bastian, what do you think? Do you agree with what Mr. Ma just suggested?
I think I broadly agree. I think your point about increased use of technology, particularly amongst younger generations, and particularly in China, where it's still a very relatively new phenomenon, has contributed to a certain type of loneliness and a lack of social skills, a lack of social interaction. I think technology, to a certain extent, has usurped the sort of social interaction that was very much part of traditional China. And younger generations are very, very comfortable with technology now, and quite find it difficult to resort to any other lifestyle.
One of the things we haven't mentioned is about the psychological help that some people really need these days. As you may know, Mr. Mark, China is still in the very early stage of developing the psychological support for the public. And you don't have enough numbers of doctors. You don't have professional consultants that could help as many people as possible. And you do not have a systematic approach to help people with their mental health to start with here in this country. Not yet. Will those areas be also possibility of bright spots for economy?
The direct economic potential is, when you look at things like this, we could fall under what we would call telemedicine, the ability to deliver medical care via the internet, via video, that psychological counseling can be done that way, and of course people can pay for it, and there's direct economic value. I think there is more important indirect social value from this, in that, as you mentioned, Tianwei, the amount of psychological resources, mental health resources in China on a per capita basis is still relatively low. And one way you leverage that, especially outside of the Tier 1 cities, and the internet, video conferencing, things like that, even the telephone, are ways to overcome the tyranny of geography with this. So I think that, yes, this is potentially very beneficial for people needing mental health services.
That's right. Professor Bastian, mental health services is one of those areas that many in the developed economies have seen a dramatic growth of. Will that also likely be the same for emerging economies like China, which is going through transformation right now? Professor?
I think very much so, Tianwei. Obviously, the characteristic of many emerging markets is rapid urbanization, so there's even more pressure perhaps stress, very sort of crowded lifestyle, and younger generations are working longer and longer hours. So when they finally return home and try to switch off, relax via some sort of online technology consumption, I think there's an even greater need for some sort of support, psychological support, and that involves human interaction. So emerging markets are probably going to see an even greater need for this sort of psychological support with mental health as a result of a very, very stressed urban, professional, working class that's now emerging.
That's right. As the world is changing, the question is, how can we be much better prepared, Mr. Mark, about more challenges ahead, in fact, and also buying our way to happiness is not going to happen. So how will a society be prepared for that? Think beforehand rather than too late. This is a very solemn question, I guess, after we joke around about, you know, what is a real loneliness economy, but this is really a solemn question. Many really need to think about very seriously.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key challenges then is first awareness, because when we look at Chinese traditional culture, this notion of mental illness or emotional distress wasn't really seen as a clinical problem that one should seek medical help for. So I think one is awareness that these are medical issues. The second then is also a kind of education to destigmatize these conditions. So we see this in the US, where for a very long time depression was seen as something that wasn't that serious, or if you complained about it, you were weak. So I think that similarly in China, and we are seeing this more and more, and I think especially with younger people, a greater receptivity to recognizing these issues, as well as the willingness to seek help.
From receptivity, from being able to accept these kinds of services, to exactly be able to help themselves and help each other about this. That's still a long way to go, Ms. Han.
Yes, especially in Chinese culture, one tends to relate his or her own fate to the family's fate and to the nation's fate. And especially the nation is under the environment or in the wake of the new trend of the globalization. So we need to think of that in advance and be prepared of that. So in addition to this kind of awareness, we should have the real actions to make this kind of whatever we call the loneliness economy or independent economy, to, on the one hand, we help boost the economy, but on the other hand, we should face the challenges, and psychologically, we should make whatever the service factors in our mind, in our mindset, or in, you know, to help others, you know, to prepare together.
Professor Bastian, obviously, you see the awareness is here, but from awareness translated into action, that's a totally different question.
Well, yes. Now, I agree with the other panelists about mental health needs to become more socially acceptable. We need to destigmatize. But I think in terms of turning things into action and concrete progress, looking to the future, I think we need to start moving towards a society where we don't just value material possessions. It's not about elitist, keeping up with the Joneses. That's not necessarily such a bad thing, but if we have too much of that, and perhaps we are seeing that certainly in Chinese first-tier cities, it leads to a deterioration in the social fabric, an increase in mental health issues. So it's a move to more egalitarian values, where material possessions are not the be-all and end-all, and quality of life is much more important.
In China's history, for example, the Taoism, as many have been talking about, is not necessarily to be in the middle of a crowd, but rather be away and be a hermit. That's a way people deal with what's in their heart and what's in the society. You also see that reflected in the Song dynasty, for example. You see that in the poetry of that dynasty, very much reflected, and the design as well. Simplicity is a way that's really reflecting how people think of that time. So all of these cultural symbols also probably could help the Chinese to navigate a time in which dramatic changes happen, and nobody knows the answers to any of these questions that they are pondering with.
Yeah, it's all about choices. It's all about to have you or equip you with the capabilities of choosing whether to be alone or whether to be lonely.
How to make that connection? This could also be part of the economy,
yes.
the so-called loneliness economy, but actually it's a very positive side of developing the economy, to take advantage of the culture and make use of it in order to boost the economy and also to let people get involved.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two issues here. I mean, first is when we look at how countries measure their development, they use GDP, which leaves out a lot of things. So I think first we need to have better measures to think about how are a country's people doing overall. But then when we look at what causes alienation, it typically happens at these dramatic shifts or industrial revolutions. So at the beginning of industrialization, there was a lot of alienation like this. And China since '78 has gone through just such rapid economic and social changes. So I think this is not surprising. But that this is where I think the government also has a role to play, because as we look back in philosophy and history, people are happiest when they feel part of something larger than themselves, you know, which is what the professor alluded to. But this is something that I think government has a role to play, either through formal education or just, you know, promulgating a sense of unity, a sense of purpose.
Right. Final words, Professor Bastian.
I agree. I think measuring happiness, well-being, and not just simple traditional economic tangibles like GDP is the way forward, and trying to get the Chinese people to define what makes them happy in a less materialistic sense. That's the way forward.
All right. Mike Bastian, Han Hua, and Andy Mok. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us. We are not lonely at all in this conversation, and best wishes to all of you. Thank you so much.